So we start out the same way. I just want everyone to go down the line, introduce themselves, tell me how you got into blockchain and what you've been doing with your life until now.
All right. Thanks, Jen. My name is Ernest. I'm the CEO and founder of Follow My Vote. First off, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here today. I couldn't be more thrilled to have this opportunity to speak with you all. I'm very, very passionate about blockchain. When I first learned of blockchain technology in 2014, I always hoped that Virginia Tech would one day become a hub for blockchain innovation. I'm glad to see us really step in that direction. So at Follow My Vote, we're striving to make end-to-end verifiable blockchain-based voting a reality. Really what we want to do is launch a global initiative to raise the integrity standards of voting systems that are used in elections today. If you think about it, since the dawn of democracy, there's been accusations of illegitimacy in our elections, and humanity has really had no good way to solve this problem until now. And with the advent of the internet and blockchain technology, we've entered a new paradigm of what's technologically possible and can bring security and transparency to our elections. So that's really what we are focused on at Follow My Vote.
So you jumped into what your company did, and so then I just have to ask you a couple questions.
Sure.
So I do a weekly podcast for an organization called CyberScoop, and we talk about cybersecurity news, breaches, et cetera. And so this time of year, we start talking about election security,
Sure.
my least favorite topic in the entire world because there's so much about it. But in the last election, there was a mobile vote on the blockchain for absentee ballots. Were you following that at all? Is that where you see yourself? Do you see yourself playing in like federal elections?
So I really think that there's a lot of opportunity. The real the foot in the door, I think, when it comes to absentee ballots, specifically for military and overseas voters. You know, if you think about it, the one people we shouldn't be deprived of voting in our elections are military overseas that are actually out there fighting for our freedom. And currently they're casting absentee ballots by mail, which is a very insecure way of casting your vote. And we actually have a direct competitor out there now that has leapfrogged us since we first announced what we were doing and are working to get our IP in place to then go out and fundraise to bring our vision to life. And they have actually done successful pilots in West Virginia in 2018 for the midterms elections. They're a company called Votes. They have a blockchain-based solution, but in my opinion, ours is much more superior to theirs because ours actually allows for true end-to-end verifiability. I mean, when you cast your vote in our system, you can really follow your vote into the ballot box and confirm with your own eyes that it was cast as intended and counted as cast. So it's a complete end-to-end verifiable trail of every action that takes place in the system, and our competitor can't make that claim. But the real opportunity, I think, the way in is to prove that it can work for military and overseas voters. It can also work for absentee ballots. Rural areas especially, people that have trouble getting to the polls on election day, that may not have mode of transportation to get there. College campuses are other great places where a lot of students end up having to cast absentee ballots because they're registered at where they live at home and not in the location of where they're school at. So Blocksburg would actually be a great place to implement a blockchain-based voting system for those reasons.
Elizabeth, you want to tell us about your history and what you're working on?
I'm Elizabeth Jose, and I actually have a background that's far removed from anything related to blockchain or technology. I studied psychology, chemistry, and studio art before starting to work in business, and then continued by going and starting an organic farm and doing sustainable development in India. So along that journey of traveling and exploring and doing all these different things, this company began after a kitchen table conversation about what's wrong with Bitcoin. And that reasoning that my friend and I had at that point was entirely focused on the human aspect of it. The fact that at that point in 2014, blockchain, Bitcoin, all of these things were very limited to people who had technical knowledge. It was a fascinating technology, and yet most people didn't know how to use it, what the benefits could be, and how it could play any role in their actual lives. So we began thinking about how we could create something that actually allows the average person to utilize this new technology, which we started believing had a lot of potential with it. So what Flewid Capital does is actually focus on the needs of immigrants and international students from South and Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, and their needs around accessing their finances. A lot of people, when they're having this transition in their lives, have money sitting in an account in one country and need it in another, and they need it immediately. They need it sometimes without an internet connection available, and that's what we're trying to allow them to do, is have a financial identity that can travel with them, to have access to their financial resources no matter where they are geographically. So our focus has been this particular group because those are needs not just when it comes to remittances, but their domestic uses with those funds. Those are needs that are often overlooked by most communities. And the specific areas that we're looking at, you're talking about people moving well over $43.5 billion in the US alone just from those regions. And the average fee for that is about 7.2%. We can undercut that significantly by adding the blockchain to our system and creating a more simplified system, which includes, of course, the KYC, AML. We've been working with all the regulatory systems in order to provide a system that works with all these existing rules and regulations, while also providing a simplified system that's user-friendly and honestly allows our user not to ever have to think about the technology behind it and just use it without any of the obstacles they would currently face, including even language, which is a big one.
So are you starting out then sort of that initial market of sort of sending money home, like sending money to my family in another country, or are you starting off the other way?
No, we're actually focusing on the domestic market itself. So in the US alone, if you look at immigrant communities or international students, they come in and they need to use their money here. So we're just giving them essentially a way to have access to their money that's sitting in accounts in foreign banks, and then having an ability to use that immediately as soon as they land in this place.
Okay,
So,
versus transferring money to like a US bank account.
So that would happen, that could happen with our system, but our focus is in enabling that first initial transaction that they have to make, and the transactions with those people who they're surrounded by immediately upon their arrival.
Okay. John, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then your company?
Sure. My name's John Jefferies. I have a strange dual role. I'm both the chief marketing officer and the chief financial analyst of a venture-backed startup called CipherTrace. We do blockchain analytics, which I'll get into a little bit more depth later. I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years, almost exclusively at startups, a variety of encryption companies. Probably my very first encounter with virtual currencies was a very long time ago with DigiCash. In fact, my very first startup I was the CEO of, I hired the CTO of DigiCash as my CTO. So I've gone deep down the rabbit hole way before blockchain in terms of virtual currencies, and there's, in many respects, crypto is just a subset of virtual, right? So that was kind of my start. I was very influenced in the early days by the white paper by this guy named Nick Szabo. He wrote the original smart contracts white paper. My CEO, who I've worked with numerous times, and I enjoyed that white paper so much that we hired Nick. And I'm happy to tell you all he's not Satoshi. Despite the rumors you may have heard, Nick Szabo is not Satoshi, although he probably knows him. So basically, that's kind of my intro into the whole space. Like I said, most of the time I've been doing startups. I went to a very large company for a very short period of time to try to address the issues around IoT security, which I think are ideally suited to blockchain. So I spent over a year at Samsung in the Innovation Center driving security for IoT. Sadly, despite how dreadfully insecure IoT is, no one seems to care. And so the manufacturers are unwilling to add 5-10 cents to their BOM to add something as simple as software updates.
Because consumers don't care.
Consumers don't care. So it was kind of disillusioning for me. But I got to work on some really fabulous projects. Because I was at Samsung, a lot of people came to me, so I got to see a lot of innovative IoT startups. I also worked very closely with the IOTA group, and we can speak about some of the prototypes and MVPs that I worked with later, probably in the innovation context. And our company now is really, we're the sort of the classic picks and shovels company. So we do cryptocurrency analytics, which really is a big data problem. So what we're doing is we're augmenting the various different blockchains with extra data. So we engage in commerce in the cryptocurrency economy and track that data. So we consume and produce about 2 to 3 million pieces of what we call attribution a week, and run that through various different machine learning and proprietary clustering technologies to essentially create a yellow pages of the entities doing business in the cryptocurrency economy, and which allows us to actually follow the flow of funds.
Who buys that?
Who buys that? So we were originally funded by the Department of Homeland Security and Science and Technology and DHS. The original use case was tracking terrorists and fentanyl dealers. It does a pretty good job of that. But because we have that core knowledge, it's also used for anti-money laundering. So we work with the various different exchanges, VASP, hedge funds, because hedge funds are also concerned about getting dirty money in their funds and losing the fungibility. We sell it to regulators, so the SEC is a customer, as is the countries of Bermuda and Malta, so we help them understand the risk inside their sandboxes. And we also have risk intelligence products and proactive threat hunting for banks. So many banks don't realize that they're being either used for hosting unlicensed money service businesses, which is contrary to their BSA obligations. And they also don't realize that they're sending money to cryptocurrency entities or receiving from there. So banks have a huge exposure right now, and that's probably one of the hottest areas for us as a company.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. First, I'd like to congratulate you all on being here this morning. My grandfather always used to say there's 3 kinds of people in life. The first kind being the people who don't know there's a parade going on. The second kind being the people who watch the parade. And the third kind being the people who are in the parade. And by being here this morning, you guys are in the parade because blockchain is going to be a pretty big parade. My name is Raphael. I'm coming from Canada, a small northern town in Quebec, and I'm living in Montreal. I am the Chief Technology Officer at EVA, and I'm a software engineer at heart, but I'm really interested in business as well. What got me into the blockchain space is because I'm really interested into software. I was studying computer science and mostly artificial intelligence in Sweden. And then I got interested in blockchain from a friend that was talking to me about it. I started to read a lot on the subject. I started to be obsessed with it, especially on the security properties that a blockchain have in terms of computer science. The fact that you don't have any single point of failure, the fact that you can timestamp transaction in a database, and it's a kind of a 3-dimension database in which you can go back in time. While reading on blockchain, I started to, I read the book Blockchain Revolution by Don Tapscott, which is a really good book. I recommend this book to you all. He was giving as an example during the whole book how blockchain can disrupt many industries. One of these industry being ride sharing, and I've always been interested in transportation of things or people. And that's what, when I was back in Canada, the political situation was a bit tricky regarding the ride-sharing industry. Uber was saying it was about to leave the country, so we saw an opportunity to actually, a friend and I, launch the ride-sharing on blockchain, especially that the 3rd generation of blockchain was now making it possible to create a platform that would bring back the value to the workers of this platform, which are the driver members. So
Could you, sorry to interrupt you, could you catch us up on like the 10 seconds of why Uber was going to leave Canada?
Oh yeah, of course. Because the legislation was too heavy regarding their operations in Quebec especially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so continue on with what you're saying.
No problem. So, and then we discovered the new protocols that were written in blockchain, EOSIO in particular. So we decided to go all in and start our own company. We started developing, we did lobbyism to be allowed in with the Quebec government, which worked with the media and everything. And then we launched our operation in Montreal. We got excited with the drivers that were really interested about being part of the platform. And then we came up with a franchise model for ride-sharing so that we could launch ride-sharing franchise all around the globe. So we're working on this model with our first franchise finance in Quebec with 600 driver members right now. And things have been developing well so far. We've been operating since 5 months, and we've seen a nice hockey stick growth since then.
So to stick with you for a little bit, so if I think of like Uber and Lyft, I think about companies operating in the red, and I recall taking an Uber from my office near Dulles Airport to Union Station in DC, which should be during rush hour like $100 cab ride, and it was like $22. No idea why it was $22. Got in the Uber, chatted with the guy. And when I got there, I asked him the question of like, how much did you get paid for this? It was significantly higher than what I had just paid for the ride. So how are you competing sort of in that world where the economics don't make any sense yet?
I think the deficit of these companies is related because they grew a lot without worrying about the efficiency of their operations, fiscally speaking. So that is one issue. The other being they have a top-bottom approach to ride-sharing, and they have a really bad driver retention rate. So it costs them a lot of money to get new drivers because those drivers are not incentivized enough in the platform to continue, so they're always paying money to do marketing to the drivers rather than have a bottom-up approach in which the drivers are being part of a local co-op franchise or are being actual shareholders of a local franchise and actually own the business and do the marketing by themselves. So this is really a bottom-up approach that is much more cost-efficient to ride-sharing, and that's what we've seen with the taxi industry for long years, and those taxi business were making actual profit at the end of the year, and were making a lot of family living. So the same bottom-up approach with a nice connecting technology through a platform can make a profitable business.
So were you welcomed by the Canadian government, or sort of like Lyft and Uber sort of weren't, right? So were they welcoming to your technology coming in to build a ride-sharing platform?
The government or Lyft and Uber?
No, we know Uber thing. The government.
Actually, the government is one of our partners.
Okay.
Because we're a local business, we're a business in Canada, developed in Canada, but our model is allowing the business to be local everywhere we develop. The franchise is always a local business. The government was really open to avoid the localization of the transport of people economy. So we've seen great openings, especially with the transparency that blockchain can provide, and other corporate partners really like this transparency as well because the database of our operations is public, so the lies are impossible.
Am I buying rides with tokens, or are you not doing tokens?
We're not doing tokens.
Okay.
We have dollars, but we have an internal commodity token that we use internally to represent the dollar, but that's mostly like in-app way of representing that you hold money that you can withdraw.
Okay. So John, and I know this is not what your company does now, but you did it at Samsung. I kind of want to talk more about IoT and blockchain and why you thought that was a good solution.
For multiple reasons. So, when I think about IoT, I think about kind of two levels, right? There's obviously the consumer level, which, as I said, people don't care about. And then there's the industrial IoT, which also people don't care about. But, the interesting thing is that, in just like in what we do, at least within industrial IoT, there's money at stake. So I worked on a few factory automation projects where, the supply chain would automatically reorder or, just reordering is a good use case, right? So you have a bunch of Electrolux vacuums coming down the line, you run out of hoses, you automatically order the hoses, right? Mm-hmm. And so, all of a sudden, did you order the right hoses? Did it go to the right place? And as you start this automation in the industrial complex, how do you know that actually happened? How do you know that you went to the right supplier? So as there becomes money at stake, and once again, in that sort of use case, it starts to be very useful. The other sorts of things we're looking at is obviously we talked a little bit about supply chain, which is interesting. And was working on a project with Maersk. Most people are unfamiliar with the fact that Maersk had a bit of an incident a couple of years ago where essentially their entire fleet got shut down. And they're basically floating in the ocean for a couple of days. So people wanted to be able to track where these large freighters were. So that was one of the use cases where we could track from point to point where the different shipments were and where the various different ships themselves were.
Interesting. So Elizabeth, talk to us a little bit more about what you see in the financial market and around blockchain and what you think is really going to happen.
So, like I said, we began with a conversation about what's wrong with Bitcoin. And I think there has been such a growth of companies coming out saying, oh, we're going to be the new thing in the financial space. And I think several other people have mentioned it over the course of the last couple of days. But most or a lot of them are looking at potential solutions without considering their actual audience. And it's often an audience that doesn't care about the technical side of it. And so I do think that while there are so many coins and things coming out, a lot of them are just not going to gain any sort of traction in the financial space. Now, there are tools when it comes to KYC, AML. We were going to develop our own identity management system that included all those policies, but we're actually working with a company in Philadelphia now that's already doing that with a blockchain-based system. And it's doing it beautifully, already doing it in line with the existing regulations and looking forward at the other regulations that might be coming up in that space. So there are companies within that side of the financial aspect as well, looking at these regulations, figuring out how blockchain can be more acceptable. And I think those will become more and more important for other companies such as my own to actually succeed and become profitable and successful within this space. But I do think that there needs to be a lot more focus on the actual audience and the people who will actually be using these tools, because otherwise we'll be overrun with coins and tools and tokens without anyone actually linking any of these things together. Another reason that we've chosen to be blockchain agnostic is just so that we can allow our tool to be used across the board. So we're not picking one or the other, but allowing our users' needs to govern where we're placing our token and how we're making the accessibility work. So
how do you go about getting into the market? Do you have to go and basically sell this to every single bank in every single country to get their users?
No, actually, we go directly to the consumers that will be utilizing the system. So the way that our system is set up, we're bypassing the need to go directly to the banks and have that cleared with them. Some banks, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, we've already had conversations with them about how we can work together in a capacity to do that. But most of these communities I'm talking about, immigrants and international students, they're very community-oriented groups. So if you give them a tool, and because it's blockchain, they can have it on their phone, they can utilize it immediately without having to worry about making that direct connection to the bank. We can provide the method for them to deposit certain amounts or purchase certain tokens with their existing financial institutions' information through a regular transfer. We can do that through our system, and so they don't actually have to interact directly. We go to the main centers, to universities, where these consumers would be, and then we actually work directly with those groups. So coming up in 2020, July of 2020, there's one community group like that. They have a national convention every year. We're set with our development to be the primary payment platform for that event. It's attended by 10,000 people from across the country. And there are businesses who sell their goods to those 10,000 people, and those businesses come from all over the world. So that's how important that space of selecting your audience is, and what part of the reason why we're focused on this community. It's a community that uses a network to grow and to spread information. So you hit even one of these events or one person, and by the end of the day, you have 100. So it's very network-oriented, very community-based, and that's just the nature of these groups. And we're trying to work with that nature. We're understanding the barriers that are more to do with psychology and history than they are to do with anything technological. So by understanding that, we can actually work directly with those people in order to spread it, and very quickly, very rapidly. The acquisition rate in those spaces is 77% by word of mouth alone. So.
And then Adam, to a completely different topic of voting,
Sure.
How do you see this industry playing out, right? There's obviously been a lot of problems in the news all the time, and politicians are talking about the voting machines, the way we're doing it.
Yeah.
But then we had a panel last week that involved basically all the federal agencies and the guys from Bug Crowd talking about, well, there's really other aspects we should be focusing on. But do you see this all going to the blockchain?
I do. I think it's going to take quite some time, though.
You're talking about like 10 years?
To really, probably longer than that. I would say decades to be fully on board a Indian verifiable blockchain-based voting system. But I do think that's the right direction for this country and for humanity as a whole. I think I look at our elections, and that's something that's sacred. You know, we really need, as a society, need to be reassured that our elections are conducted in a fair way. And through my own education process of learning about the key players in the industry, the technology that we're using, I become very, very aware of the security problems and vulnerabilities that exist throughout our systems. I mean, I'm talking to advisors, registrars of voters in various states, and you know, I'm not lying when I say that there are machines in use that have manufacture dates in the 80s. I mean, we're working with archaic technology that is very, very easy to hack. You know, they're recently in I believe 2015, 2016, here in Virginia alone, we decertified the WinVote voting machines because they were found during an actual live election. Someone was able to sit in a parking lot of a centralized polling location, hack into the Wi-Fi network, and change a bunch of votes without anyone being the wiser. And literally, the username was admin, and the password was ABCDEF. I mean, it's almost as if these systems are left open to manipulation. I mean, if you even tried to secure the network, maybe, you know, you could have at least tried to thwart a would-be attacker, but it's almost unconscionable to believe that these gateways are really there and left open at times to would-be hackers. I can tell you, when we first really launched this educational marketing campaign, when we first decided we were going to do this thing, we came up with 1,000 reasons why we should move to a blockchain-based voting system. We pointed out instances of successful hack attempts on the system through and through. So I really think the only way to truly secure our voting systems is move it to the blockchain and make it publicly verifiable. Because, I mean, right now, if you think about it, elections happen in a black box. I mean, we all just put our blind faith and trust in the system. When we slip that ballot into the ballot box, or we cast our vote on the voting machine, on the back end, those votes are actually getting recorded correctly. But we don't know that. We don't have insight into that. And because these vulnerabilities exist, there's potential for fraud. And in all likelihood, there have been elections that have been tampered with, and the wrong person ended up getting elected. If you think about some of these elections, some of them are decided by a percentage point or even half a percentage point. And that's these vulnerabilities that exist, if taken advantage of, are capable of swaying elections. So I see it as a very big challenge, and it's something that it's bigger than follow my vote. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than follow my vote. This is something the world needs to get behind, and I really think the time is now. I mean, you had I don't want to get too political, but you had Donald Trump running the last election, coming out saying the whole system's rigged. You have a presidential candidate accusing the system of being vulnerable, and this time around we have a Democratic candidate for president, Andrew Yang, who's actually come out and said that blockchain voting is so important, he's basing his entire campaign on it. If he gets elected, he's going to put his number one initiative is to implement a blockchain-based voting system here in the United States. So he's been advised by some of the top technical people in the world and come to the conclusion that the technology is ready. The solution is there, and it's just a matter of taking action. I do think the time is now to start that process.
John, I know you wanted to jump in.
Sure.
You're a cybersecurity guy.
I just want to jump in on this, and Adam and I were talking about this yesterday. I know a lot of hackers, and you guys are probably aware of DEF CON and Black Hat. 2 summers ago, they had what they call a village. So they had the hack the voting machine village, where they got permission to get every voting machine used in the United States to this village with 50 hackers, and they own these things every way to Sunday. There's not one that survived. There was not one, like I said, I come from the hardware security as well. Some of the very basic things, essentially they left USB ports wide open. So they were very, very simple to hack. It was unbelievable, and I know for a fact the folks I work with at the DHS are very, very concerned about the integrity of our elections. So I personally think, elections are a killer app for blockchain.
I mean, we're still in a country in a time where we can dump 50 USB drives into a parking lot at any industrial plant, and someone's bound to pick it up and plug it into something. So I mean, that's just who we are still. We don't care about that stuff yet. And so I guess I question a little bit, even if the candidate running for president wins and wants voting to happen on the blockchain, whether or not we'll get there any quicker.
Sure.
Well, I would add that when you think about voting, in order to have an honest voting system, I mean, we're talking about building open source software that's publicly verifiable and auditable, and the entire system, every action that takes place within the system can be publicly verifiable. So there really is no chance for fraud. If someone tries to hack the system, it's immediately detected and that hack is thwarted. So I don't want to say that nothing is hack-proof. I mean, because technically anything can be hacked, but if you take the right technological approach, it's virtually impossible to hack the type of blockchain-based voting system I'm talking about. But you can, when building out the software, it must be open source. And if it's not Follow My Vote that's going to bring this solution to the world, whoever does it, it needs to be open source to be fully trusted.
And I would just say that the hardware itself needs to be certified. One of my panelists yesterday was talking about FIPS, the Federal Information Protection Standard. Most, even in the crypto space, none of the wallets are actually FIPS certified, so you don't actually know that they're secure. Same thing with all these voting machines. So the hardware themselves need to be secured and validated by an external party, and the data itself needs to be on the blockchain.
Well, you just can't take hardware from the 90s and expect it's going to be secure today.
As we say, trust yet verify.
So we've got about 24 minutes left, and I do want to open up to audience questions, but I do want to hear a little bit more from John, since you did raise capital. And while it's not exactly blockchain, it's data around the blockchain. What was that like when you first went out to investors and kind of pitched what you were doing?
So I'll say, just generally, even in the cybersecurity space, you need to have very, very educated investors. You need to have investors that already understand the technology, because if you need to educate them and bring them up to speed on blockchain, the level of heavy lifting is extremely high. If you can find investors that are already on board and already believe in the technology and the direction, and you just convince them that you have a use case that's viable, that is the way to go. I'm in the Silicon Valley, right? So everyone wants to find the next unicorn, and that's part of the story. In fact, we could be a unicorn, but that's not the core thing. I think one of the things that we have is a management team that's worked very closely together in the past. So 5 out of the 6 of us in the executive staff have run multiple companies together, so that was super helpful. We also got strategic investment from Galaxy Digital. So one of our customers became an investor, which they've been highly supportive as well.
Awesome.
And then we're raising another round, and the level of interest is extremely high.
So let's go sort of down the line again, start at the end, and talk about where you think your industry is going, where you think blockchain's going, what do you think the next hot thing is in the space?
Well, my industry, ride sharing, I think we're about to see the disruptors getting disrupted. By that I mean the financial situation of the leaders in the market isn't at its best. So I'm looking forward seeing what's going to happen in the future. But it's a market, the ride-sharing market, that is growing year after year. And this is also the market which has the relation with the customers for the future of the market of transportation at large. Because of self-driving cars, the relationship people have with their cars is going to drastically change. We're already seeing this in big cities. So I think this market will grow more and more, especially with self-driving cars that will take some time to arrive, but that are arriving. And I think that blockchain has its place in the future in a network where all the cars need to talk together. I think client-server infrastructure would be inefficient, and a blockchain that you can log the transaction would be great in terms of law, because you can prove in the court that a certain event occurred at a certain time. In a case of insurance, just for efficiencies between multiple companies using the car network. So I think there'll be a lot of developments in the transportation of people industry regarding blockchain as well. And for blockchain, I'm really excited because we have a lot of problems regarding the privacy of people. And right now, blockchain can provide a solution to that. People are realizing more and more, not technologically enthusiast people, they already know, but most people in the streets, they start to realize all the data that gets extracted from their use of their digital life, and the applications that will bring back the value of this commodity to the users will have a competitive advantage. So I'm looking forward seeing the value of the data of the people, which is about their privacy, getting back to them. So I'm excited about this. I'm excited also about seeing better database management than what we're seeing right now. Because right now we have like lockbox databases that have secrets into them. So you have social security number on a database, or you have important information of people, and once you get access, you can just leak the information and everything is gone. And it's a bit counterintuitive to think about that, but by having an open database that everyone can read, you're obligated to have privacy by design, and you're obligated to use cryptography in a better engineered way to protect the data of people. So I'm excited of seeing a better engineered database system with blockchain. I think the consumers all around will win a lot in terms of their security, because right now in Quebec, Canada, we just had 5 million social security number leaked, so people can just claim a credit card in your name, and that's not a good situation. So it's mostly excitement, and we're seeing like mass market decentralized application being started right now. The blockchain applications had problems in terms of usability. It was complicated. You need to use a wallet, but we're starting use a wallet or learned a lot, and we're starting to see more and more decentralized applications that do this stuff, but at the protocol level and have a seamless user experience. And there's these developing, so I think it's going to grow more and more.
John?
Great, thank you.
Wait, and before you do that, do you think blockchain is going to make us more private? Is it going to protect our privacy more? Or are you ruining that?
Definitely not. Now you're changing my segue.
I'm curious to learn about.
I'll get to the privacy second. But first of all, any of you that are, kind of on the fence, whether or not you think blockchain is real, whether or not you think it's something you want to pursue, I'm here. I believe, and I said this yesterday, that I think it's as big of an IT technical advance as IP was back when invented it, and it's fundamentally changing how we address IT and how things operate and how integrity is assured within data. So I think it's critically important. And at the community levels, from the EOS community to the Bitcoin community to the Ethereum community, the level of innovation is just unbelievable. It's my undergrad's in finance, so it's fascinating to see what's going on in the DeFi space. So there's a lot of underlying cool stuff going on in the technology, but really, what really makes it super, super cool is, and super, interesting is it's instantly global. So classically in the US, startups would start here, get some traction, and then slowly go to the UK, and then maybe do a couple of European countries. This, out of the gate, it's instantly global. So we have customers in every parts of the world, and we're a 24/7 business. So the globalization and the rate of change within the communities is really exciting, and it's kind of like a race, but it's a very fun race. So that said, the nature of the immutable blockchain means that anything that gets written there is written there forever, right? And so people talk about putting identity on the blockchain. That concerns me a little bit because it's there forever, right? I protect my identity pretty closely, so I'm cautious about what data I would ever put on the blockchain, and if so, I would want it hashed or some other way obfuscated. But quite frankly, privacy is one of my passions, and it would seem contrary to some of our business model because what we're doing is literally de-anonymizing transactions. But at the same time, there's a level of transaction that should be de-anonymized, and just as we have in the banking system, transactions over 10 grand, $10,000 you can start to do some damage with. So I don't feel that people should be able to move $100,000 or $5 million without some regulation, without some observation and determination whether or not that's illegal or funding terrorists, or in the case of North Korea, funding missiles. So my counter to the libertarians is that sure, data wants to be free, and sure, I protect my privacy vigilantly, but I really wish those North Koreans hadn't bought those missiles with crypto, and that's what they did, right? So there's a challenge, and I think part of the innovation and part of what the work that we've been doing with Block One and the Digital Chamber of Commerce is around education. So education is critically important, as I said, with investors, with the end users, with the consumers, with businesses, but also very importantly with regulators. So we spend a lot of time educating them with respect to the capabilities and some of the concerns around blockchain. And one of the things I hope to do is to instill privacy. We were talking about the travel rule yesterday, which is the sending of user data with a transaction, which is PII, and you'd be sending it to a potentially unsecure exchange. So there's initiatives that we're pursuing around protecting that data using zero-knowledge proofs or using tokenization such that that data is private. So I think in terms of delivering the privacy, I'm really looking at another layer as opposed to protecting the privacy on the blockchain, having a separate layer over and above for some of these regulatory needs that is strongly private and strongly encrypted.
So that's pretty much perfect for what I...
Thank you.
Because one of our major considerations has been the regulatory space, and I think in the financial space, what we're already seeing and what we will see more of is collaboration to make sure that we are protecting privacy. Yes, we are providing a system with more integrity, with more transparency, but at the same time, having layers of protection. And that's integral to the way that we're operating and the considerations we're making on how we're building our financial system. And I think that's going to continue to happen and hopefully with more companies utilizing blockchain, collaborating together to make sure that they're doing it together so that we have these layers being built as a group and having these same systems function across the board as opposed to everyone kind of doing their own thing. I think in a more ideal situation, there will be more collaboration even within the financial space as we move forward. As for blockchain as a whole, I hope that saying, oh, I'm using blockchain isn't such a big deal soon. I think that what we can do with blockchain is really beautiful for so many systems that it should become the norm, that it's just embedded into these systems. It shouldn't be a big deal. Blockchain should be the norm. So ideally, as we go forward, it will become the norm and it won't be such a big deal when a company says, oh, I'm using blockchain too. So.
Yeah, I agree with Elizabeth. I think blockchain is going to become integrated into all aspects of our everyday life. With respect to Follow My Vote, we did talk a little bit about, the voting industry, and I do see blockchain voting really becoming the norm in the way we cast our vote in the future. And I do spend a lot of time when you're thinking about voting and that being our core business, I do spend a lot of time thinking about identity and blockchain identity specifically. And one of the things that, because when you go and vote on election day, you have to verify you are who you say you are in order to be granted the right to vote and to be given the right ballot in order to cast your votes on election day. And one of the things we're already seeing with states, even here within the United States, is that we're moving from ID cards and driver's license to digital driver's license and ID cards. I've recently moved out to Colorado, and we just, in 2020, we're moving to digital driver's licenses. So I do see opportunities to do digital identification, digital driver's license, put that on a blockchain, and that actually gives us an opportunity to protect our privacy more so than we can today with our current form of our driver's license. If you think back to Lee's example yesterday, for those of you that were here from Block 1, he mentioned going to a bar and having to show your ID. And when you show your ID, you're presenting that your identification, and all of your information is given to that bouncer, even whether or not you're an organ donor. And who really needs to see all that information? So when I see digital identity going onto the blockchain, and I do see every element of someone's identity being independently verifiable in order to for you to use that identity and those different elements of your identity to interact with applications online and to conduct business online with both the public and private sector. So I do think that's going to be a huge wave when it comes to how we conduct business online.
Let's open it up to audience questions. I don't have an intern here to ask a question. Please, sir.
One of the examples of a big hack came from darknet, the Xbox, or even the Cambridge Analytics, where they were scraping profiles. With blockchain, one of the benefits is that transparency. Is there any way going into, for example, the voting system, that could be prevented as opposed to after they've been through the process? Maybe with AI or...
Could you try rephrasing the question?
Sure. So blockchain is decentralized and has transparency. And with the hacking that goes on, the bad guys are taking that information and through various gateways. And in the Facebook example, they scrape the profiles. If we put all that identity information onto the blockchain, is there any way that they can still do that?
Yes.
John does that for a living.
Sure.
Would we have to marry blockchain with AI is that the next logical step?
I'd say more likely cryptographic controls.
Thank you.
In the back?
Yes, I have a question for Elizabeth. So you mentioned that these individuals would transfer funds, from East Asia and Africa and other areas. They'll go through KYC and AML to meet regulation requirements. And then you mentioned tokens. So I had a question as far as if they're wanting to spend these funds on college tuition, for instance, some of which may not accept these certain tokens, products and services. If it doesn't go through a banking clearinghouse, how does an individual have a universally acceptable method to spend these funds? So basically the question is, what's the off-ramp? Thank you.
So there are two parts to that answer. First, in terms of where we're making our system available initially, we're working in those specific areas with the universities and everything else to actually allow this to be acceptable within those spaces for specific transactions. The other part of it is we are still working with banks and the clearinghouses, et cetera, so that in the event that we cannot allow them to utilize the tokens, we are actually providing the fiat currency back in that space so that they can use it there. At the end of the day, we're creating just a simpler system for them to be able to transact, whether that has to be back in a fiat currency or a token.
Any other questions? Oh, wait, there's a follow-up question, I think.
Sorry, I had one follow-up. So you mentioned traditionally the rates that these individuals would pay would be around 7%, I believe, if that's correct. Going through and paying for vendors such as KYC and AML, what's the percentage that you estimate this will cost?
We're actually able to undercut, because of the way that we're doing the KYC AML with this, through this other company and their blockchain system, we're actually able to undercut the cost significantly, often about 3% as opposed to the 7%. In some cases, it's also situational. Certain countries, there are different requirements, and for certain transactions, different requirements. So we can get it as low as 1.5%.
Any other audience questions?
Yes, I have one. I have one question for Adam. So in your voting system, how many voters you can support? How many? You mentioned that this presidential voting, right?
Sure. So and that's one of the things that at Follow My Vote, when we decided we're going to pursue blockchain-based voting, we decided right up front we were going to be blockchain agnostic, right? And we would consider implementing with any sort of blockchain that made sense. It just so happens that you need a really fast, really scalable blockchain to be able to conduct an election, say a national election on a single election day. So when you think about blockchains like Bitcoin, it doesn't really make sense. You know, they have that proof of work consensus algorithm that would prevent high-speed transactions. So a blockchain platform that would make a lot more sense would be a delegated proof of stake, you know, smart contracting platform like, you know, EOSIO. That's really where we're looking today. That as the ideal platform to integrate at this point in time. Back in 2016, we did develop a minimum viable product of our blockchain, a stake-weighted version of our blockchain-based voting system, one that you could use for things like shareholder voting for corporations and things like that. And we integrated that with the BitShares platform. So we were successful in building our MVP, and we targeted BitShares at the time because it was using a delegated proof of stake system. It is possible if you target the right blockchain. And guys like Dan Lamb are making things possible.
Cool. I have one more question. So beyond this presidential voting, any other applications? Because in my mind, real world presidential voting, so there's a concern called the coercion concern, right? Coercibility.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Coercion.
Voter coercion.
Yeah. So how will you address that?
Yeah, okay, so voter coercion is an objection that a lot of people have raised over time. But if you think about it, voter coercion can happen in the current way that we're voting. You take a state like Colorado, for instance, they do all mail-in ballots. Who's to say that wives or husbands sit at home and don't coerce their wives to vote a certain way when they fill out their mail-in ballot and send that in on prior to be counted on election day? So people raise a lot of objections when it comes to mobile voting, but a lot of those same objections exist within the current systems, and most people don't realize it.
Gentleman in the blue shirt.
Yes. So I also have a question for Adam.
Sure.
Concerning adoption of electronic voting systems and hopefully an open system that's blockchain-based like you have been working on. Do you see that opening the door for allowing more sophisticated election algorithms such as ranked choice voting or approval voting, where voters are allowed to rank the choice of candidates or designated candidates they approve, so that unlike with paper ballots, you have the possibility
Sure.
of voting your conscience. With paper ballots, you really couldn't implement that practically.
Yeah, Eric, I'm really glad that you asked that question. I think that approval voting could single-handedly solve a whole host of problems here in the United States. If you think about it, when we go and vote on election day, we're forced to pick a single candidate that we want, that we would like to serve as the President of the United States. But imagine no primaries. Imagine a ballot where every single person who wanted to run for president would be listed on your ballot. And you could go in and actually say, I would be okay with this person being the next president of the United States. I would be okay with this person being the next president of the United States. And I would be okay with this person being the next president of the United States. You don't have to hold a primary. Everyone gets a fair shot at being on the ballot. People can weigh in and put give their approval for various candidates. And when you aggregate those votes, what you'll find is a lot of time the more moderate candidates actually have the most support in this country. If you think we are a very polarized nation right now, you have the extreme left and the extreme right, and they are galvanizing their base to get the nomination, and then it becomes a battle in these debates trying to win over voters. There's a lot of infighting, and we end up focusing on issues that polarize us instead of looking at the things that can bring us together, the things that we share and have in common. And so I think approval voting is like a silver bullet. If we could do approval voting, it would solve a lot of problems for those reasons.
So we are officially out of time, so thank you to the panelists for joining us today.
Thank you. Good job. Nice meeting you.